we had presented to OpenAI to a group of researchers. I remember I was presenting, and like half the audience was just looking at their laptops, and kind of like left that meeting feeling like, oh, no one cares, And then a week later, Waj calls us up and he says, hey, we've got this problem on the robotics team. Like, come check this out. Can you help us out? And we go look, and I remember going there with Sean, and both Sean and I are looking at it, and we're excited, right? Because this is like, we can solve the problem, and it's they're telling us they have a problem, they want us to fix it.
You're listening to Gradient Descent, a show about machine learning in the real world, and I'm your host, Lucas Biewald. Okay, so this episode is a fun departure from our normal format where I interview two people in the machine learning space about their work, but these two people happen to be my co-founders of Weights and Biases, Sean Lewis, our CTO, and Chris Van Pelt, our corporate vice president. And I talked to them about questions that have been stewing inside of me for years, like, why did we start this company and where is it going? And honestly, I was surprised and educated by their answers, and I hope that you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed asking them these hard questions. All right, here we go. Should we just jump right in? How did this company start? And I ask this because it's the most common question I get asked if I go on any other podcast or with any candidate. Everyone wants to know, how did you start the company? So I was kind of realizing you two both have founding stories that's kind of telling the same story, but it may have diverged in its evolution. So I would be curious to hear you two's version of the story. I guess, which of you wants to go first?
Sean, I think you should go first.
All right. When I started my career as a software engineer, I was at Google, and I was in the platforms team at Google. So I joined, this is back in 2006. And I worked on all kinds of stuff in the platforms team. The platforms team was responsible for building the data centers and all the machines inside the data centers that Google uses. And I wrote a lot of the software that ran in those environments. And when you write tests like that, they generate a ton of data. So I at first I was writing tests, but then I ended up with just all of this data. And really where I ended up spending my time was on making tools and data pipelines that would help us understand that data. And that's what I realized that I loved doing. So I ended up writing all kinds of different tools and data pipelines, and the data's in all these different databases all over Google, and I sort of merged it into one place and defined the metrics that we use to understand hard drives, and then made these sort of user-facing tools. And when I say user, I mean other people at Google that they could use to dig in and understand this data. So I worked on a lot of stuff like that at Google. It was super fun. And then I eventually left, and then I started this company called Beep. We built hardware. We built a lot of things, and it's kind of tangential to the story, so I won't go into it. We were also in Y Combinator, and in that Y Combinator batch was actually Lucas's wife, Noga, who I'm not sure if folks know this, but she's the founder of a company called Picnic Health. And so we were in a Y Combinator batch. We ended up sharing an office together in the Mission in San Francisco for a couple of years. And I got to know Lucas that way. So, we had a hardware component at Beep. We had this hardware lab, and Lucas loves robots, and he was kind of always tinkering in his garage building robots. And he would come up to my hardware lab and poke his head through the door and go, "What are you guys doing in here?" And also my robot's broken. And we'd just start to get to know each other and work on the robot and help him fix it. And so we became good friends that way. And I guess as Beep wound down, I think, I don't know, that was 2016. I think this is my version of the story. Chris and Lucas were sort of starting to step out of Figure 8 around the same time. And the circumstances were really good. Deep learning was starting to take off. We were all really excited about it. I had been thinking about these problems a lot. I really would, I'd love the chance to work with Lucas and Chris. And we just sort of started hanging out and talking about it, and jumped on that opportunity and started building the stuff that I needed to organize that data. Yeah, it was, an exciting time, and it still is.
All right, Chris, I think you have a different version of this story. Let's hear it.
All right, so we got to go back. We got to go back to 2006, like Sean. Except in my 2006, I'm coming to San Francisco for the first time, and it's to work at an exciting startup. I feel like I've made it. I've been doing web development and trying to kind of advance my career, and happened to be into Ruby on Rails, which was really hot and exciting at the time. And there's this startup in San Francisco that was using Ruby on Rails and using machine learning to create a smarter, hopefully more relevant search engine. So that startup was PowerSet. And I came up to San Francisco, it was like the beginning of 2007. And that's actually where I met Lucas. So Lucas and I joined PowerSet at roughly the same time. And I was in the product team interfacing with a whole bunch of the other backend teams to try to create an interface to this exciting new tool. Fast forward about a year or so, and Luke and I decided, PowerSet, it's been fun, but I think it's time for us to give our own go at creating a PowerSet or a startup. So we set out to make crowdsourcing more accessible to the enterprise and people that wanted to do it, to collect training data to train machine learning models, way before machine learning was as cool as it is today. Yeah, fast forward about 10 years through kind of creating a startup with Lucas, learning a lot along the way. And at the time that we started Weights and Biases, kind of Luke and I's day-to-day responsibilities at the company were winding down. So we were asking ourselves, like, what is next? I remember going to Lucas's workshop where most of his podcasts are recorded, and playing with robots. And I was like really into Lua for a little while there, thinking we could make a cool like Lua toolkit for robots. But then it was really Lucas having an internship at OpenAI and actually building models with some of the world's most renowned machine learning researchers, and needing tools to help him get his job done. That was the initial kind of itch that we were scratching. So I love building tools. Luke's like, hey, I need a tool to help me build models at OpenAI. I said, great, let me try to whip something up, and just really poured myself into making a very early prototype. And then shortly thereafter, Sean came into the picture, and I am forever grateful.
Awesome, man. Those were, I was getting some messages from Lavanya to pull you both back on the rails while you're talking. But, I love the extended cut founding stories. I think mine is like a sentence or two. Sorry, Lavanya, now she's texting me but, the secrets here. Actually, that's a good segue into, here's another question that I have for you. So, Sean, you've been out on paternity leave. Chris, you've been like talking to like lots of customers independently from me. And so people keep asking me this. They're like, what is like the architecture of the Weights and Biases server? And I try to describe it, and I realize I honestly have no idea. Like, I know there's like MySQL involved and React. Can you like give me the like several sentence like lay of the land? Like, say I'm like an engineering candidate and I just want to know like, what are we using? How does it all fit together?
Okay. All right. We got a single page React application that is our front end. It's just a lot of JavaScript. We load that up into the browser, and then it makes requests against our GraphQL backend, which happens to be written in Golang. When a customer wants to run Weights and Biases themselves, we actually deliver all of this, the single page React app and the GraphQL backend API, in a single Docker container that they could run within their Kubernetes cluster or in a managed kind of Terraform-based deployment that we support. And then the backing persistence stores are super simple. We've got MySQL and an S3 compatible object store, or Azure Blob Storage or Google Cloud Storage. Yeah, there's a little Redis in there, but customers generally don't have to worry about that.
It's nice because from early on, we knew that having on-prem, the potential to go on-prem was really important for our customers because of data privacy concerns, because these data sets are so valuable and have all these sort of other privacy concerns. So we really just kept it simple to make that possible. And yeah, it's been, those were good early choices.
Sean, you wrote a document, I think at one point, that was like what it would take to be $1 billion business for Weights and Biases. And I thought maybe we could pull it up and compare it to what it actually took to be $1 billion market cap business. Looking at this document, how do you feel that things have played out? Is anything played out differently than you expected?
Yeah, so, well, I guess the core of the argument was like, we're not sure if we can build better products than everybody else in this space, but we can raise a lot of money. We know we can do that, and we're well connected to lots of customers because of Lucas and Chris's background with Figure Eight. So it's very easy for us in the early days to kind of go into a customer with very little to show. We had a demo of the early parts of the product and have good conversations. And that's like really what it takes to develop good products, is to actually interact with customers who look at the product and give you feedback on, either a demo or by actually using the product. So the argument was we should rapidly expand into sort of the different parts of the ML pipeline in parallel, and leverage those connections and the ability to raise money. We could build a team that could sort of build products in each of these spaces. I would say we didn't quite do that. I think we still have this goal of expanding across the ML pipeline. And this early sort of theory that maybe we may not be great at building products. I would say maybe this is maybe not so humble of a statement, but I think we built something that users really love, and we definitely did it by hiring great engineers and great product people, and by talking to these customers a ton, and spending lots and lots of time and just having this relentless customer focus. But I also think that somehow at core, there's kind of this magic somewhere in what we're doing at WMB, and that we do understand the space and the customers, and we turn that money and customer connection into great products. And so, back then I was thinking, well, we have great products, and looking back now, I feel like we really do. And that's really been a cool journey.
All right, I have a question for both of you. I was kind of wondering about, was there a moment where you felt like the business was really working, or the company is really working? Like, can you think of a time when you really suddenly felt like that, or not? And if so, what time was it?
I think there's a couple times, but one that really stands out for me is driving down to like Palo Alto or Mountain View or wherever we were like meeting. And one of our first deals was with Toyota Research Institute. And I remember kind of sitting out, I'd grabbed lunch with Ari, our kind of first account executive. Grabbed lunch. We knew we were going to go into this meeting and present the number that we were going to sell our software for. And I had this thought of like, this moment it's really important. Like, it's scary when you're brand new, you don't have many other customers, and you go and you say, hey, we want to charge this much for our software. I felt like this is make or break. And we went in, the meeting went really well, and we ended up closing TRI as one of our first customers, which was great. But after that, I mean, I wasn't like, okay, now we're set. It's like, just, next week we can get to a $1 billion valuation. But it was, that first customer was really big.
Yeah, that was a big one. I mean, that's the thing, as a founder, or probably anybody at an early stage startup, you're kind of, there's always, you do the thing, you say, oh, if we can just do this one thing, then we'll be sure that we made it. And then like the next week, you're back to work, and you have to grow some more, and you're always looking at the next thing. But that first customer was a great one. I think for me, what comes to mind is, I think this was maybe like around the holidays last 2 years ago. And so, in the earlier stages, even up to say like 15, 20 people in the company, you kind of have a pretty good sense of everything that's happening. Every deal I remember, being a part of in some form. But there was a moment around the holidays a couple of years ago where we have these Friday meetings where we get together and sort of talk about how the week went, and it's everybody at the company, and somebody says something great that they did. In that particular meeting, I just remember, there was like somebody on the sales team who had made another sale to a customer I'd never talked to, and somebody in the growth team that had like found a new growth experiment to do and executed it and actually like made numbers change, and somebody in the product team that had done something that I didn't even know they were doing. And so all of those things came together in one meeting for me. And that's when I felt like, wow, this company's a lot more than like sort of, I can't wrap my arms around it and push everything forward anymore. There's like all these great people around me that are doing that. And that is an amazing feeling, because like, from there you sort of add more and more great people, and the company continues to go in a good direction. And it's like bigger than yourself.
Another question I had for both of you is there like a favorite like feature in the product that you feel really proud of, or something that some way that the product works that you think you feel like is uniquely great?
For me, it's got to be the command line interface. I think it's a very underappreciated interface to our product. In the early days, I spent an obsessive amount of time on making a whole bunch of command line commands and making it work nicely in Unix. I was like piping stuff at one point. I think we've since decided that's not the way most people want to interact with our product, but it's as a nerd, as a Unix nerd, that's my favorite part for sure.
I mean, there's a lot of great parts of the product that I'm proud of that everybody at the company have built. I guess, maybe something that people don't really see is there's this layer in the front end that we made. And so, in WMB, you've got all these different charts on the screen. And the architecture of the front end is that each chart can individually make its own network requests to get like the data that it needs to show. And those are actually kind of heavy requests because there's like millions of data points sometimes if you've logged a lot of data. So you built this cool layer in the front end that kind of, it's like a middleware that watches all of the requests going out and it aggregates them all together. So it has a little time delay and it says, give me all the requests that happened in the last 100 milliseconds. It does lots of cool, like handwritten optimizations to figure out how to merge certain kinds of queries together and get all the results at once in a single request and then give that back to the user. And so a lot of users, you have no idea that's going on, but this is, you have to, when you're building UIs, you really want it to be snappy and fast. And I hope that I'm not like shooting myself in the foot. I'm sure somebody will have a story of weights and biases not being snappy and fast. And if you do, send it my way and we'll get it fixed. But there's like this massive amount of engineering effort that went into that chunk of code to make sure that charts with like millions of data points all on the screen at once can be updated really quickly.
I guess just so people don't think I'm only asking like kind of softball questions here, this is something that a couple candidates have asked me about recently. Have there been like product or engineering efforts that we would do a lot differently in hindsight?
I mean, I've got one that isn't bad, so it's not fair. When we first started the company, I wrote the backend in Python, and it was Python 2 because I wanted to use Google App Engine to serve things up so I didn't have to do a bunch of DevOps stuff. That quickly stopped scaling, especially because we have a GraphQL backend where things need to happen in parallel. So our first engineer, Tom, actually rewrote that entire backend in Golang. And when you do a big rewrite like that, like we already had TRI as a customer, OpenAI was a heavy user. We had to like keep the site up while this was happening. And usually those kinds of exercises can go sideways. You can start to take way longer than you would have anticipated, or the ultimate project wouldn't have worked out. And that was an example where Tom actually got the project done ahead of time. And we're still running that, pretty much the same backend code to scale up to the tens of thousands of users that we have every day now. So it's, I guess, not a decision I would go back and say not do. I also now that I had a good experience doing a rewrite, I certainly wouldn't say we always do a rewrite, but you don't hear it often. Our choice to do the rewrite was definitely the right choice, and it worked out really well.
What customer feedback has surprised you the most?
I guess I have an example like from early on when we started the company, which was the very first version of Weights and Biases was more of a command line tool around saving data. But there was a little bit of UI, and Chris had built this Python library and this UI, and the UI was essentially what it did was it let you log in and give set up a place to store the data that the command line tool was saving, but it didn't do a whole lot more than that. And I remember Chris added a feature that would just kind of it also collected the outputs of your training runs, like the standard out, the logs. And Chris added a feature that would look for the Keras, the specific Keras like metrics that it printed over time. And he just made a line chart of that. And, of course, early on in a startup, what you do is you have a demo or a thing that kind of works. You go to customers and you show it to them. And all the customers were like, yeah, command line tool, okay. But what's that chart? And they would really focus on that chart. And the reason it's surprising to me is because these are programmers and data scientists and people who are really comfortable in Matplotlib and Jupyter notebooks. And so, sort of a thesis you might have is, well, data scientists don't need a tool to create a bunch of charts in their browser because their use cases are going to be so different and they're just comfortable doing it themselves. So it's really a big surprise to me that was the main thing people focused on. And so we saw that and we said, well, let's follow what users want. we did that. And we kept building the UI and making it better and better. And, we were able now to have a sort of generic UI that solves lots of different kinds of use cases. But it was surprising that would be possible for this kind of user.
That's a good founding story right there. Chris, what about you?
The most notable user feedback that is top of mind is an early user, Hamel at GitHub, was like a heavy user of the tool. I remember one night Hamel wrote in and said, "Hey, we really want to log HTML," and we were actually able to like ship that feature in that same night, which was delighting to Hamel. But Hamel was also like, he did not hold back in telling us like where we were not being excellent in the UI, and was very honest about some pretty serious issues with the system at the time. And I remember like breaking my heart as a founder. Like, here I've got someone who's like engaged and excited about us, but he's like getting frustrated by using our tool. It's like the worst possible thing I could imagine. So, the team really focused and did a lot of hard work to kind of redesign and re-engineer a lot of kind of the problem interfaces that Hamel was running into. And ultimately, I think it really helped us make a better product.
So how do you think the last 4.5 years of running this kind of hyper growth startup has changed you as a person or changed your perspective on the world?
Like, I remember when we first started the company, after Luke and I had been working at Crowdflower for 10 plus years, and I was just so excited to be like, have a blank canvas. It was like, oh, we can start fresh. There's like nothing legacy we need to support. It's just, green fields. And I tend to think of like, all the company stuff, the process and the management and all of the things that you need to do to make a company work. Historically, they didn't interest me that much. And I think something has changed, especially with this company, is that now I find those things more interesting. Being able to kind of step away from just hacking all the time and actually think about, okay, how do we build a culture, and how do we kind of mentor and work with the team to ultimately build a better product? I think those problems are much more interesting for me this time around than they were when we were running Crowdflower.
I guess another question I had is, like, what do you think's like changed around us as we've been running this company? Like, do you feel like customers are different now? Like, do you feel like the industry is different at all?
We started the company like sort of a year or two within like when deep learning was first, when AlexNet was first like trained, or when AlexNet actually showed real results. And we really focused on deep learning. I mean, one of our first customers was OpenAI. That's well known, and they're still a great customer of ours. And we spent a lot of time sort of building things, that were sort of tailored to OpenAI use cases. And when you start a company, it's good to make a bet on what you think a growing market will be, because you don't want to go into, you can do this, but you don't necessarily want to go into a big established market and just fight with, Google and Amazon. It's better to focus maybe on something that's smaller and they won't spend all their resources fighting you on. And then the market sort of grows to the point along with you where all of a sudden you're this $1 billion company. And you can't really you can't just do that. You have to there's some amount of luck for sure. We had very good timing in starting weights and biases. And that's that's a really cool feeling. And it's really cool to ride that trend. And so in doing that, what we've seen is deep learning really took off. I mean, it's applied in every vertical now. Every company has at least a few people who are building deep learning models now. And those teams are constantly growing. And we see that in the way that our contracts grow with our customers. So, I guess we sort of bet that would happen, but to see it actually happen and to be able to ride that trend, there's no way to really feel what exponential growth is until you're in the middle of it. And that's what it feels like.
I remember one moment early in the company that stands out, which was we had presented to OpenAI to a group of researchers. I remember I was presenting, and half the audience was just looking at their laptops, and kind of left that meeting feeling oh, no one cares, And then a week later, Waj calls us up And he says, hey, we've got this problem on the robotics team. Like, come check this out. Can you help us out? And we go look, and I remember going there with Sean, and both Sean and I are looking at it, and we're excited, right? Because this is like, we can solve the problem, and it's they're telling us they have a problem, they want us to fix it. And after that, Sean and I, like, we pulled in like an all-nighter, basically, just like cranking out the interface that they wanted, and got it to them within a couple days. And just, I remember thinking, like, how precious is this like relationship with OpenAI, this institution that I really, really admire. And also that same feeling Sean described of some users saying, like, hey, I have this problem. And we had the power to go back and actually fix that problem for them.
Do you remember the afternoon when they turned on Weights and Biases?
That was another all-nighter.
Yeah, it turns out there was some performance problems with my Python backend, if I'm recalling.
Well, there were a couple of things. I mean, like, we did not anticipate OpenAI's skill because, we're doing the thing that you do it as a startup, which is you make an MVP. It doesn't really need to scale. But it turns out our very first customer was like one of the largest scale customers we could have. So they, I think, we finally convinced, they were the first person who integrated Weights and Biases into this like library that they had that everybody on the robotics team was using to run training code. And so as soon as they committed that to production, it started sending us a ton of traffic. And the site just like immediately went down because it's like this cobbled together kind of startup website. And actually, the first problem was there was some like API limit that we hit on Google because of the way we were making a specific request. Chris might remember what it was. And there was no resolution. Like, you can't just call Google and get them to immediately like change a limit for you. You actually have to wait for a support case to go through for a number of hours. And of course, like, now maybe we're a big enough customer of Google that we could have some influence. But back then we were just this little startup and we can't go, but it's our first customer. That doesn't really sway anyone over there. So I don't remember how we worked around that. Do you remember? Did we just wait?
We had very smartly designed the Python library to back off when things started failing. So I think the quota resolution got resolved within the like retry.
And so that was like
timeout.
One problem. And then like later in that evening, of course, we're like pumped because we have all this data coming. It's OpenAI and it's our first customer. And some other problem cropped up. Again, you might remember this, but it was something where Chris and I, we were up till 5 a.m. that night, and Chris was like live patching like our App Engine code. It was Google App Engine at the time, which is like this Python kind of auto scaling platform that's not as used as much now. And I remember, we came up with a plan and we live patched the thing. And I was like, is this going to work? And like it did. And the traffic started coming in clean and we could see all the data. And we were so proud to have our first customer. And then, of course, like the next morning we went to talk to OpenAI and they didn't even notice the hiccup. They were like, oh, yeah, cool. Thanks. But I mean, really, like it was working when we went to have that conversation and they started looking at the sort of charts that we had and started giving us that feedback. And that's when we got into the feedback cycle. So, it's important in the early days. If you have any customer at all and they have a problem, solve the problem, like stay up all night and solve their problem. Even if they don't notice it, it's worth it for you to start getting, that great customer feedback that you need.
What were your darkest moments specifically?
I mean, I think early on when it was like me and Ari, that was the sales team. And we would, this was before the pandemic. So we would like fly wherever we needed to fly to. And some might think like, oh, you get to fly to like Toronto. It's got to be great. It's not great. You like fly and then you go to some hotel and then you go to a meeting where you're just trying to get people to like engage with you and learn about the product. And there were a couple months there, like very early on, where I felt like we can't charge enough for the product. People don't see it as being valuable enough. It can be very demoralizing, especially when you're out there, on the front lines of sales and trying to like educate and teach people about these concepts that are literally being like created as we're iterating on the product.
I think like a dark moment for me is, we already talked about this, but when we were first trying to sell to GitHub, we had this user Hamel who we talked about earlier, and he gave us very direct feedback about like how our product sucked. And he was like totally right. And I love building this product, and like even now, like it's hard. I'll take it personally for sure. Even though I know that some of the decisions are bad, or there's lots of things that could be improved. When somebody calls it out, it definitely hurts. But we really want that feedback. Like I'm happy to go through that roller coaster of emotions to make a better product, and really that feedback led Weights and Biases to the place it is today. And so, you really you have to be willing to accept there's lots of bad things. We want to know what they are. We made those decisions. Like, it's my fault. It's Chris's fault. It's probably Lucas's fault and Lavania's fault to some extent. And we can always improve stuff. And you take those sort of gut punches in stride and keep making it better.
I have this memory. I wonder if this is like an accurate memory, or you see it the same way. But I kind of remember thinking of making experiment tracking and doing an offsite where we really built something like super custom for TRI, and then going there and showing them kind of like a beta of the experiment tracking stuff that we built, and having them basically tell us like this isn't that interesting, and that feeling bad. And then I have this memory of talking to you, Sean, and I think you were like, I don't think anyone will pay for experiment tracking. And I was kind of thinking, you're probably right. And then I remember talking to you, I was like, I just need to tell you that like, I need you to be more positive, which is so funny because like, I feel like actually you're like almost always the optimist. And it was funny to just like, I remember like at least thinking to myself, what I need to communicate is I just need you to be positive, even if it's not like rational to be positive here, because like I'm feeling like a lot of doubt myself. Is that an accurate memory?
Yeah, I remember that. So that was before we had that first user who was actually using the thing and who we felt like they were getting value. And so we kept saying, what if we build this other thing? Will that get us a user? Or what if we build this other thing? We did that, for a number of months. I mean, it was the early stages of the startup. And that was disheartening because it's like, okay, if we could build this other feature tomorrow, but nobody's going to care. That was kind of the mindset I was getting into. And you were like rightfully calling me out on like, well, this is the early stage of a startup, so let's like make the next thing until we have that user. And I think it was like, again, it was getting that first user who sort of broke that off. And from there, it was like, hey, I just need this one little tweak. Great, we'll do it. And it was all positive, maybe not all positive, but more positive from there.
All right, Luke. So if there are other entrepreneurs listening to the podcast and wanting to build a startup that achieves a $1 billion valuation, what advice as a startup CEO would you give them?
Well, I feel like the advice probably depends on who that person is. Let's picture someone. Who are you thinking of here?
All right, so it's someone that looks a little like us, right? They're programmers. Mm-hmm. They're interested in starting a company, but maybe don't have a ton of experience on the business side of things, but they're passionate about the product they're creating.
Well, I guess, there's so much advice out there that I think is really good these days. Like, I feel like when we were all starting our companies the first time, being an entrepreneur wasn't a thing, and doing, like Y Combinator has put out so much good stuff that's really, you forget how not obvious it is to people that you need to make something that people want, right? And you can't emphasize that enough, right? But I feel like now people kind of know that, which is fantastic. And it definitely wasn't obvious to everyone when we were starting, or maybe as obvious to us as it should have been. But I think the thing that people don't talk about as much as I think they should, or the advice that I feel like I can uniquely offer because it's worked so well for me, is to pick a customer that you really love spending time with. Like, I feel like a lot of these ML startups, especially, they totally start from like a technology and kind of like what's interesting to do with it. And I think that's a bad idea. Everyone kind of knows that that's like a bad idea, but then they sort of like, work backwards from like a use case that they find interesting. And that's maybe like, it's an okay idea, but I think the thing that gets lost is that, at least for me, the thing I do as CEO, the thing I have to do all day long is spending time with customers, spending time empathizing with customers, thinking about customers and bringing the customer voice into the company. And so given that that's, I think, maybe the most important job as CEO, you should pick a customer that you really like, right? Because you're going to spend so much time with them, over the entire arc of your company. And so I think having a specific idea of who that is, and making sure you like them, I think, is a really key thing. Like I remember at Crowdflower, we tried to sell into different types of customers, and so I really felt this. Like I went to CMO conferences, and like I contrast that for myself, like going to NeurIPS and like just really enjoying making small talk, like enjoying all the details of things that people say. I mean, I also believe that's really powerful for the world and good for the world, but I think even more than that, just on a day-to-day, motivation, like the impact will sustain you over the long term, but over the sort of short term, I think I really appreciate that I'm working with a user base that I really care about and enjoy talking to.
Lavanya's in the chat here. We're taking questions from the audience. And
what's the hope for Weights and Biases in the next 5 years? I feel like almost like it's like a jinx to say that question. I don't even know if I have a good answer. Maybe do you guys want to try first?
Of course, like take it sort of from a product and tools standpoint. I hope that we can build interconnected tools across the ML pipeline that really work well together because they share these common underlying threads or infrastructural pieces, or dare I say bones, which is what I like to call them internally, and everybody sort of makes fun of me for. But like to me, it's really important that the data that you collect about your model in production can be used to inform decisions that you make back in the data collection process and the training process. So many parts of the ML pipeline, it's hard to build all this stuff. But if you think of like the best companies, like, somebody like Google who's building ML, they've built all this, they've verticalized all of it internally and built it themselves. And they've built tools out of other tools. I want to be able to make a platform like that outside of a giant company and give it to the rest of the world and sort of use all the use cases that we encounter to make it better and better and more general.
I think it'd be really satisfying if Weights and Biases becomes a core part of every ML team's infrastructure. And we're really known for making really high quality stuff, really useful stuff, really, really powerful stuff. I think we're on that trajectory, but I think ML is growing so much that becomes every company when every company has an ML team, which it seems like we're headed to in the next 5 years. So I think that's the biggest thing.
And it's like, if you imagine the company that is in that position, what does it look like internally? I think we kind of have this today, but I mean, there's folks building data tools and ML tools at lots of companies in the world and doing a great job. And I want to get all those people in the same place, people who love building these tools. And, maybe there's folks out there who work on these tools and don't really love it and want to switch to something else. That's great too. I mean, you should move through things in your career, but I would love to be surrounded by people who really love this problem and really love the people who work on this problem as customers, just all together, all of us, maybe not in an office in the modern world anymore, but kind of distributed around, working on these problems together and just building great stuff that users love so they can, build ML models that make the world better.
Here on Gradient Descent, since you guys are both mega fans, you know this, but for new listeners, we always end with 2 questions. And the penultimate question is, what is the most or an underrated topic in machine learning, something that you would love to work on if you weren't working on Weights and Biases?
I want to make a painting robot, but it uses like an actual brush. Okay. Not like just a plotter or something. It's going to be very complicated. That's not the big world-changing answer maybe you were looking for, but that's what I would be really stoked to like pour a year of my life into, I think.
Like a paint bot?
Yeah, paint bot. That's right.
Cool. All right.
Underrated topic. Maybe we should have started that robot company. It could have been kind of a myth. This question's funny because we touch so many of the problems in machine learning and Weights and Biases. Not all of them, but I mean, we're building tools that are used for like all the verticals, right? So of course we're going to touch them. So maybe I'll sort of say something that we're not explicitly doing that I think is really important and that I feel like I am actually doing, which is I think model understanding is like critical in the future. We need, like, deep learning models are really tricky to understand. It's like a research area. There's like, it's really dependent on what kind of model you're building, what techniques you might use to figure out why did my car make the decision that it did at a specific point in time. And so I think like as these models get more and more complex, it's more and more important. And I want to understand the models. I want to understand the models for the world to be good. And I want to understand the models because I think that gives us some understanding into the nature of intelligence and our own sort of decision-making processes. So, we're not like explicitly doing model understanding at Weights and Biases, but we're trying to build tools, and we'll talk more about this, over the next like 6 months, I guess, that head in that direction.
I'm kind of tempted to answer this question, but I feel like maybe it's better as a host if I remain mysterious in terms of what I think is the most underrated topic. But I will say, I love the company that we started, and I would not change it. Obviously, it was a really good choice to do it. But one thing that we kicked around in the early days, well, we kicked around two ideas. One I think is a terrible idea, which is a painting drone, which I think would be fun, but probably just a terrible idea, but still would be really fun. The second idea, which I think I would still love to do it, and I think we thought we were kind of the wrong team to do it, but actually I think we might have been a good team to do it, but the timing seems like it might have been bad, which is to build a better simulator to help robot companies like simulate what they're doing and then deploy into the real world. And I just think that still kind of needs to exist. And there's different takes on it, but it doesn't seem like it's been nailed at all, especially with the kind of like physical part of it. And I also think that would be a really fun company to do, although a much slower ride. But my answer to the most underrated topic in ML is still a secret. So the final question is, when you look at actually all of our customers trying to like deploy models successfully, what do you think their biggest pain point is? We always ask guests this who are mostly at these companies trying to do it, but looking out at everyone, maybe we restrict ourselves to people already using Weights and Biases, because the people not using Weights and Biases, obviously maybe that's their biggest problem, but the people that are already using us, what is the big thing that they run into?
I mean, there's like a cop-out answer, which is probably it's hiring.
That might be accurate. Hiring, yeah. At some point, we should collect some stats on what people say, and maybe that'll just sort of answer it based on at least people we interview. But yeah, what are you guys seeing?
It really varies in our customers, because somebody who's building a self-driving car, for example, they're building like 100 models in parallel, and with no proof that self-driving cars could still actually exist and work on public streets. I guess we're getting very close now. As opposed to somebody maybe who's got like, a bunch of financial data and needs to predict credit scores. In the credit score problem, you actually model understanding, what I was just talking about, really, really important. You probably need to use something dumber than a deep learning model so that you can actually say why you made a particular credit prediction. So like our customers are extremely varied. I hope we're solving like a lot of the problems on the model creation side of things. I think that there's a really hard problem of figuring out what models are doing in production and then taking the data from production and integrating it back into the model training process. And I hope that we get to work on that problem too. But I bet that a lot of our customers would express they have challenges there.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Sean's response and kind of say, specifically, I feel like CI and CD, when it comes to these ML pipelines, just is nowhere close to what we have in the regular software development world. So I know we have a lot of exciting things in our roadmap to help with kind of automating all of these steps as a model moves through the pipeline and then comes back to get retrained and understanding how it's performing in production. But I personally look forward to the day that all of this can be automated in a way that doesn't involve people manually running shell scripts, which is often the case today and really unfortunate.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys. It's been a real pleasure working with you, and can't wait for many more years.
You guys
can't wait for more podcasts, Luke.
Yeah, we got to
You're a fantastic podcast host.
A year from now, see where we're at.
If you're enjoying these interviews and you want to learn more, please click on the link to the show notes in the description, where you can find links to all the papers that are mentioned, supplemental material, and a transcription that we work really hard to produce. So check it out.
I thought it'd be fun, since it's a friendly guest, obviously, to add some like zany new features to this podcast. So I thought like one section would be, I'm going to name a technology, and then you got to immediately say underrated or overrated, and then if you disagree, we can fight it out. What do you think?
Let's go.
Are you ready? Okay. Reinforcement learning.
Is there a middle ground? Wait, is it only under or over?
Yeah, you got to decide.
I love reinforcement learning. Underrated.
Yeah, I'll go with Sean. Underrated.
All right. AutoML.
Overrated.
Yeah.
Come on,
really
Sean.
tough.
It's bad for business.
Underrated.
Wait, I already forgot what you said, Chris. You think it's overrated?
Yeah.
Wait, why?
Because I think it's really important that the ML practitioner is like using their own creative powers to make choices about how the model's architected. It's like automation everywhere else. I have mixed feelings about it.
Sean, you want a quick rebuttal to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like torn on this one. There's like two good answers, but I do think, of course, like the technology to train models should evolve over time, and things should get smarter. For example, like our sweeps tool does kind of help you find good parameters for a model. And I think as a company, what we need to do is, like, as those tools get better and better, it's sort of automatically building models. There's all kinds of other problems around model building, like getting the right data in the first place, and we need to build those. So like this space is moving so quickly, and of course AutoML will probably continue to improve, but there's lots of other problems around it to be solved for the practitioners.
All right. Well, I think people should leave comments for which they found more convincing, but definitely bonus points for the weights and biases plug in there. I like it. Okay, next one. The singularity.
Underrated?
Yep, I'm with Chris. Underrated.
Whoa. Bold. All right, we'll move on. Okay, ready? Big table.
Overrated.
I'll go with underrated, sure.
Whoa. All right, Sean, maybe you go first.
I think Bigtable, I was at Google, like, as Bigtable was starting to be used. And at the time, this was, again, it's like 2006, Bigtable was really big inside of Google. It kind of enabled all of the technology that we had, the search and everything else that people were building, Gmail. And it didn't exist elsewhere in the world. And when I left Google, I saw the world starting to sort of copy Bigtable, and it became things like NoSQL. So, I mean, it had a huge impact on the world. I think maybe today, raw Bigtable itself, maybe this is what Chris is probably alluding to, is a bit of a challenge. And maybe I'll let Chris take it from there.
The reason I said it, because I remember a day early in the founding of this company when we were trying to figure out where to store our metrics, and you were like, Bigtable will solve all of our problems. It's perfect for this. And it's kind of been a thorn in our side a little bit. I mean, it's done its job well. But you could ask a handful of engineers at Weights and Biases, and I bet you most of them would gripe about Bigtable. And I think our use case is like a little funky for the way we're using it.
For like large sort of time series where you want to fetch like, a few million contiguous points at a time, especially in a shared Bigtable cluster that you get from Google, there's some challenges there.
Okay, Python.
Underrated.
Yeah, underrated.
Okay, Jupyter.
Underrated.
Jupyter Hub.
Underrated.
Mm-hmm. Underrated. Great.
Kubeflow.
Underrated.
Underrated.
All right. SageMaker.
Overrated.
Interesting, man. All right. TensorFlow.
Underrated.
Underrated.
Incredible.
Wow, you guys are super aligned. Hard to get some dissent here.
Yeah, we got to live up to your podcast name.
Yeah. I guess we'll get some other pairs of guests, or maybe we could ask other ones the same questions and then.
I mean, do you differ from us in any of those, Luke?
I mean, some of these technologies, I'm even kind of hazy on what they are. Like I was thinking BigQuery, Bigtable. I was hoping I would learn what the difference is, to be honest.